You are not losing control of your life in one moment, but in thousands of small moments where you let your mind judge without examination. Today you stop that pattern and begin to govern yourself with reason and discipline. Your suffering is not created by events, but by untrained judgment of events. You react, you assume, you attach meaning to what is not yours to control, and you call it reality. Stoic practice begins when you separate what depends on you from what does not, and refuse to be ruled by impulse again. If you are ready to think clearly and live with inner order, subscribe and stay with this work. This is not motivation but training in how to meet each day without self-deception or wasted reaction. What follows are 10 practices that return your mind to itself and rebuild your life from reason upward. Number 1. Distinguish what you control and release the rest. You wake each morning already defeated because you hand your peace to things that were never yours to control. A message changes your mood. A stranger's opinion ruins your confidence. A delay fills you with anger. A mistake chains your mind for days. You speak of wanting calm, yet you build your life on unstable ground. You ask the world to obey your desires and then call yourself unlucky when it refuses. Look carefully at your life. Not the life you explain to others, the life you actually live. How much of your suffering comes from reality itself, and how much comes from your refusal to accept reality as it is? This is the question you avoid because answering it honestly would force you to admit that much of your exhaustion is self-created. You suffer because you confuse what belongs to you with what does not. Your thoughts belong to you. Your choices belong to you. Your judgments belong to you. Your actions belong to you. Your character belongs to you. But reputation does not belong to you. The economy does not belong to you. The past does not belong to you. Other people's loyalty does not belong to you. Their approval does not belong to you. Their understanding does not belong to you. Their respect does not belong to you. Yet every day you neglect what is yours and chase what is not. This is why your mind feels scattered. You are trying to govern the behavior of other people while failing to govern yourself. You want control over outcomes while refusing responsibility for your own judgments. You demand certainty from life while living without discipline inside your own mind. The first step toward freedom is not changing your circumstances. The first step is seeing clearly what was always under your command and what never was. Right now, your mind moves like a frightened animal, one moment lifted by praise, the next crushed by criticism, one moment hopeful because life goes your way, the next bitter because reality refuses your demands. You call this living, but it is slavery. A person ruled by external events is not free. A person who cannot remain steady when life changes has surrendered the government of their soul. Understand this clearly. Peace does not come from controlling events. Peace comes from controlling your response to events. A storm may arrive. A betrayal may happen. Your plans may collapse. Your body may grow weak. None of this asks your permission. Life acts according to its own nature. The disciplined mind accepts this without complaint because it understands that anger toward reality changes nothing except the condition of the person carrying it. You waste years arguing with facts. You replay conversations that already ended. You resist losses that already happened. You demand fairness from a world that never promised it. While you fight reality, your life passes unnoticed. Look at your anger closely. Most anger comes from the belief that reality should obey your expectations. Someone speaks harshly and you become furious because you expected respect. Plans fail and you become bitter because you expected certainty. People leave and you collapse because you expected permanence. But why were these expectations trusted so completely? Everything outside your character changes. Every person carries weakness. every body ages, every possession disappears, every situation shifts. You know this intellectually, yet you live as though permanence was guaranteed. Then when life behaves exactly as life always has, you act betrayed. This is not wisdom. This is self-deception. The disciplined person prepares their mind before events arrive. They do not demand a painless life. They demand strength within themselves. They do not ask the world to become gentle. They train themselves to remain steady in difficulty. When criticism comes, they examine whether it is true. If true, they improve. If false, they move on. Their peace is not destroyed because they do not place their worth inside another person's mouth. When loss comes, they grieve without losing themselves. They understand that attachment without awareness creates suffering. They appreciate what exists while remembering it is temporary. When obstacles appear, they do not collapse into self-pity. They ask one question: what is still within my control right now? This question changes everything. You lose your job. You cannot control the decision already made, but you control whether you respond with dignity or despair. You control whether you sharpen your skills or drown in bitterness. You control whether hardship makes you wiser or weaker. Someone betrays you. You cannot control their character, but you control whether you become consumed by revenge. You control whether you poison your own mind with endless resentment. You control whether you learn to recognize truth more clearly next time. Your body becomes ill. You may not control the illness itself, but you control whether fear rules your thoughts. You control whether you meet pain with courage or panic. Do you see the difference now? The undisciplined mind says everything must change for me to find peace. The disciplined mind says I must change regardless of what happens around me. This is where real strength begins. Most people never reach this point because they remain addicted to blaming. Blaming circumstances, blaming parents, blaming society, blaming bad luck, blaming everyone except the person responsible for governing their own mind. But blame is comforting because it removes responsibility. If your misery belongs entirely to the world, then you never have to confront your own habits. You never have to examine your reactions. You never have to ask whether your suffering grows from your own judgments. The examined life is difficult because it leaves nowhere to hide. You say people make you angry. No. Your judgment about their behavior creates your anger. You say failure destroys your confidence. No. Your interpretation of failure destroys your confidence. You say uncertainty terrifies you. No. Your demand for certainty terrifies you. Events themselves are often smaller than the stories you build around them. A delayed message becomes rejection. A mistake becomes proof of worthlessness. A disagreement becomes disrespect. The mind invents suffering faster than reality creates it. This is why attention matters so deeply. If you do not watch your thoughts, they will govern you without your consent. Begin observing your mind as if you are standing beside it. Watch how quickly it reacts. Watch how often it assumes the worst. Watch how eagerly it turns inconvenience into catastrophe. Most of your thoughts deserve suspicion, not obedience. You think discipline means controlling the world around you. True discipline means controlling the conversation inside your own head. The next time something disturbs you, pause before reacting. Not later, not after the damage is done, in the moment itself. Ask yourself clearly, is this within my control or outside it? If it is outside your control, release your grip immediately. Not because it does not matter, but because resistance cannot change it. Complaining cannot rewrite reality. Rage cannot reverse the past. Anxiety cannot guarantee the future. If it is within your control, then stop wasting energy on emotion and take action. This practice sounds simple until life tests you directly. Someone insults you publicly. Your pride burns for retaliation. Pause. Their words belong to them. Your response belongs to you. Do not surrender your character to another person's lack of discipline. Your plans collapse unexpectedly. Fear rises instantly. Pause. The event happened. Your judgment about the event remains flexible. Meet the situation with reason before emotion decides for you. A person ignores your effort and gives no appreciation. Bitterness appears. Pause. You were responsible for acting with integrity, not for forcing recognition from others. Again and again your freedom depends on this pause. Without it you live mechanically. Instinct reacts before reason speaks. Emotion drives behavior. Habit governs destiny. But the disciplined person interrupts this chain. They place reason between event and reaction. In that space they reclaim authority over themselves. This authority cannot be taken by politics. It cannot be destroyed by failure. It cannot be stolen by insult. It exists entirely within your own power if you choose to exercise it. Yet many people fear this responsibility because it removes excuses. Once you understand what belongs to your control, you can no longer justify living carelessly. You can no longer pretend your anger is unavoidable. You can no longer pretend your reactions are helpless. The truth becomes uncomfortable. You are accountable for the condition of your mind, not perfectly, not without struggle. You will still fail. You will still react emotionally. You will still lose your balance at times. But failure is not the problem. Refusing examination is the problem. Each evening, sit quietly and review your day honestly. Where did you surrender your peace to things outside your control? Where did you demand certainty from life? Where did anger overpower reason? Where did fear dictate action? Do not perform this examination to shame yourself. Perform it to wake yourself up. A person who refuses self-examination remains a stranger to themselves forever. You spend hours studying other people while remaining ignorant of your own mind. You know the habits of celebrities, yet cannot identify the thoughts destroying your own peace. You observe the failures of others while repeating the same weaknesses daily within yourself. Turn your attention inward. Notice how much energy disappears into things you cannot command. Endless arguments in your imagination, obsession over reputation, fear of future events, regret about the past. These thoughts consume your life while producing nothing useful. A disciplined mind asks a different question. What action is required of me now? Not tomorrow, not someday, now. If you need to apologize, then apologize. If you need to speak truth, then speak it. If you need to begin training your body, then begin. If you need to leave destructive habits behind, then stop delaying. Your life changes the moment you stop negotiating with what you already know is necessary. Many people wait for motivation before acting. This is weakness disguised as caution. Action must come from principle, not mood. Your feelings shift constantly. Reason must govern where emotion cannot. There will be mornings when discipline feels unpleasant. Act anyway. There will be moments when fear demands retreat. Stand firm anyway. There will be times when your mind seeks comfort over truth. Choose truth anyway. This is how character forms, not through grand speeches but through repeated decisions aligned with reason. You become what you practice daily. If you practice resentment daily, you become bitter. If you practice distraction daily, you become weak. If you practice excuses daily, you become dependent. But if you practice attention daily, you become aware. If you practice restraint daily, you become steady. If you practice honesty daily, you become trustworthy to yourself. The world does not decide this. Your repeated choices do. And understand this carefully. Releasing what you cannot control does not mean becoming passive. It means directing your strength where it can actually produce virtue. You still work hard. You still prepare carefully. You still pursue excellence, but you stop attaching your peace to outcomes outside your authority. You do the work fully, and release the result. You speak honestly and release the reaction. You act with integrity and release the reward. This creates a stability most people never experience because their emotional state depends entirely on external conditions. One compliment lifts them, one criticism destroys them, one success makes them arrogant, one failure makes them hopeless. Their inner world has no foundation, but the disciplined person builds their foundation within character itself. They measure themselves by their actions, not by applause. They seek virtue rather than approval. They ask whether they acted rightly, not whether they were praised for it. This is freedom, not freedom from pain, not freedom from hardship. Freedom from slavery to things outside yourself. You cannot prevent aging. You cannot prevent loss. You cannot prevent uncertainty. But you can prevent these realities from corrupting your judgment. And this matters because life moves quickly. Days disappear while you argue with circumstances. Years vanish while you wait for perfect conditions before beginning serious self-examination. Meanwhile, your habits harden, your mind weakens through neglect, your character becomes shaped by repetition rather than conscious choice. Do not wait until suffering forces wisdom upon you. Train now. When small inconveniences appear, practice calm. When desires arise, practice restraint. When anger appears, practice examination. When fear enters, practice reason. Philosophy is not decoration for conversation. It is training for the mind under pressure. A person who only speaks about discipline but never practices it remains unchanged. Knowledge without application is useless. Wisdom exists only in lived action. So begin with one discipline today. For one day, stop complaining about what lies outside your control. Watch how often your mind tries to resist reality. Watch how quickly blame appears. Watch how frequently you demand the world obey your preferences. Then return yourself to reason again and again. This repetition matters. A strong mind is built the same way a strong body is built. Through consistent training under resistance, no one becomes disciplined accidentally. No one becomes peaceful through wishful thinking. You must participate in your own transformation and understand that no one is coming to rescue you from yourself. No speech will save you if you refuse action. No advice will matter if you continue worshipping comfort over discipline. The responsibility for your life remains entirely in your hands. This should not discourage you. It should free you. Because if your peace depends on external events, then you remain helpless forever. But if your peace depends on your own judgments and choices, then power returns to where it belongs, within you, not in the crowd, not in fortune, not in circumstances, within your own reasoned mind. So the next time life strikes you unexpectedly, do not ask why this happened to me. Ask instead what part of this belongs to my control right now. Then govern that part with complete seriousness. Govern your thoughts, govern your words, govern your actions, and release the rest without bitterness. This is the beginning of freedom. This is how a human being stops living like a slave to events and begins living according to reason. Your life changes the moment you stop demanding control over the world and start mastering yourself instead. And that work cannot wait another day. Number 2. Examine your judgments before they become habits. Your life is being shaped by thoughts you never examined. A single judgment enters your mind, and within moments it becomes emotion. Emotion becomes action. Action becomes habit. Habit becomes character. Then you look at the condition of your life and wonder how you arrived here, while never noticing the silent decisions happening inside your own mind each day. You believe your suffering begins with events. It does not. It begins with the judgments you attach to events. A delayed response becomes disrespect. A criticism becomes humiliation. A setback becomes failure. An uncomfortable moment becomes proof that life is against you. The event itself is often small. Your interpretation gives it power. This is why your mind feels restless even when nothing dangerous is happening. You do not live according to reality. You live according to judgments you accepted too quickly. Watch your thoughts carefully, and you will see this for yourself. Something happens, and before reason has time to speak, your mind rushes forward with conclusions. You decide what another person meant. You decide what the future will become. You decide what your pain says about your worth. These judgments happen so fast that you mistake them for truth. But speed does not make a thought wise. An undisciplined mind accepts impressions without examination. It treats every emotional reaction as trustworthy. It obeys anger immediately. It follows fear automatically. It clings to pleasure without questioning whether that pleasure weakens the soul. Then years pass, and the person wonders why peace never lasts. You cannot build a stable life on unexamined judgments. A person who does not govern their thinking will eventually become governed by impulse. Their moods will direct their choices. Their desires will dictate their conduct. Their fears will shape their future. They may appear free outwardly while remaining inwardly enslaved to every passing reaction. The disciplined life begins when you stop asking whether a thought feels true and begin asking whether it is true. There is a difference. Your feelings may tell you that you are rejected because someone grew distant. Your judgment may tell you that your value has decreased because another person withdrew approval. But reason asks a harder question. Is your worth truly dependent on another person's changing emotions? The answer is no. Your mind tells stories long before evidence appears. This habit destroys clarity. You rehearse imagined disasters. You invent motives for others. You build resentment from assumptions. Then you suffer emotionally from situations that exist mostly inside your own interpretation. This is why attention is one of the highest disciplines. A careless mind becomes vulnerable to every destructive impression that enters it. A disciplined mind pauses before agreement. That pause changes everything. When irritation rises because someone speaks harshly to you, pause. When envy appears because another person succeeds, pause. When fear grows because the future looks uncertain, pause. Do not immediately obey the first judgment your mind produces. Hold it before reason, as if placing metal into fire for testing. Ask yourself whether this judgment strengthens your character or weakens it. Ask whether it aligns with truth or merely protects comfort and pride. Very often you will discover that your first reaction comes not from wisdom, but from ego. Ego demands recognition. Ego seeks control over others. Ego expects life to unfold according to personal preference. Then, when reality refuses these demands, suffering appears. The disciplined mind does not assume its first judgment deserves trust. Consider how often anger enters your life. Anger rarely begins with facts alone. It begins when your mind declares that something should not have happened. You decide reality has violated your expectations. Then you resist what already exists instead of responding wisely to it. This is why two people can face the same event while one remains calm and the other collapses emotionally. The difference is not the event. The difference is judgment. One person sees difficulty and says, "This will destroy me." Another sees the same difficulty and says, "This is unpleasant but manageable." One person sees criticism and says, "I am worthless." Another says, "Perhaps there is something useful here to learn." One person sees uncertainty and demands guarantees before acting. Another accepts uncertainty as part of life and continues forward with reason. The mind interprets before the body reacts. Your inner life is shaped by interpretation more than circumstance. This should force you into serious self-examination because it means your thoughts are not harmless. Every repeated judgment trains the soul in a particular direction. If you repeatedly interpret discomfort as injustice, you become resentful. If you repeatedly interpret struggle as defeat, you become weak. If you repeatedly interpret pleasure as necessity, you become dependent. You are practicing something every day whether you realize it or not. The question is whether you are training yourself toward discipline or toward slavery. Look honestly at your habits of thought. How often do you assume the worst about yourself? How often do you expect disaster before evidence appears? How often do you turn mistakes into permanent identities? A single failure becomes I always fail. One rejection becomes nobody values me. One difficult season becomes my life is ruined. This is not reason. This is exaggeration fueled by undisciplined judgment. The disciplined person speaks to themselves differently. They remain honest without becoming dramatic. They do not deny pain, yet they refuse to turn pain into identity. They see events clearly without adding unnecessary suffering through reckless interpretation. You must learn this skill because your mind will otherwise become a dangerous place to live. Many people fear external hardship while ignoring the chaos inside their own thinking. Yet, no enemy harms you more consistently than false judgments repeated daily without resistance. A person can survive poverty with dignity. A person can survive illness with courage. A person can survive failure with wisdom. But a person who trusts every destructive thought eventually abandons themselves from within. This is why your mornings matter deeply. The moment you wake, your mind begins rushing toward distraction and judgment. It remembers unfinished arguments. It anticipates problems. It searches for validation. It creates pressure before the day even begins. Do not begin the day in mental disorder. Sit quietly for a few moments each morning and prepare your judgment before the world tests it. Remind yourself that difficult people will appear, delays will happen, mistakes will occur, plans may change, your body may feel tired. None of this prevents you from acting with reason unless you surrender your mind carelessly. Prepare yourself before entering the day. Tell yourself clearly that your responsibility is not controlling events, but governing your responses honorably. This practice builds inner steadiness because it prevents surprise from controlling you. The unprepared mind expects comfort constantly, then ordinary difficulties feel unbearable. The prepared mind expects challenge and therefore meets it with greater calm. But preparation alone is not enough. You must also examine judgments in real time. During the day, notice when your emotions begin intensifying. Strong emotion often signals the arrival of unchecked judgment. Pause and identify the thought beneath the feeling. If jealousy appears, ask what belief created it. If anxiety appears, ask what future you are imagining. If shame appears, ask what standard you believe you failed to meet. Bring hidden judgments into the light of reason. Many thoughts lose power once examined honestly. You fear embarrassment because you believe mistakes reduce your worth. You fear rejection because you tied your identity to approval. You fear uncertainty because you demand guarantees before trusting yourself. The disciplined mind exposes these beliefs instead of silently obeying them. This work requires courage because self-examination removes comforting illusions. It forces you to admit that many emotional storms begin inside your own interpretation rather than the world itself. People often protect harmful judgments because changing them would require changing habits. A person who constantly blames others avoids responsibility. A person who always seeks sympathy avoids discipline. A person who dramatizes every hardship avoids the harder task of endurance. But a life built on avoidance cannot produce freedom. You become stronger each time you refuse to indulge false judgment. Notice how often your mind seeks emotional excess. A small inconvenience becomes catastrophe. Temporary discomfort becomes permanent despair. A disagreement becomes betrayal. This habit exhausts the spirit because the mind never allows reality to remain simple. Train yourself to describe events accurately. Do not say everything is ruined because one plan failed. Do not say your future is hopeless because progress feels slow. Do not say someone hates you because they disappointed you. Speak with precision inside your own mind. Precision protects reason from corruption. A person who exaggerates internally eventually loses contact with truth. This discipline also changes how you speak outwardly. Complaining becomes less attractive because you recognize how complaint strengthens negative judgment. Constant complaint trains the mind to search for offense and difficulty everywhere. Gratitude disappears. Perspective disappears. Self-command disappears. The disciplined person does not ignore hardship, but they refuse to feed suffering through endless verbal repetition. They face reality directly, then ask what response virtue requires now. That question matters more than emotional reaction. Not what feels easiest now. Not what satisfies pride now. Not what gains approval now. What response aligns with wisdom and self-command right now? Sometimes the answer is silence. Sometimes the answer is patience. Sometimes the answer is difficult honesty. Sometimes the answer is restraint when the mind craves emotional release. This is the struggle of inner governance. You must repeatedly choose reason over impulse until reason becomes stronger through practice. No one drifts accidentally into wisdom. Wisdom is built through examined judgment, repeated consistently over time. Your evenings are just as important as your mornings in this work. Before sleep, review your day carefully. Which judgments controlled your behavior today? Where did you react without examination? Where did pride distort your thinking? Where did fear create unnecessary suffering? Where did you abandon reason to protect comfort? Do not review your day to condemn yourself. Review it to sharpen awareness. A person who studies their own mind daily becomes harder to deceive. They begin recognizing patterns before those patterns harden into character. This examination should be calm and exact. No self-pity, no excuses, no dramatic guilt. Simply truth observed honestly. You lost patience today. Why? You sought approval today. Why? You became resentful today. Why? Continue tracing reactions back to judgments. Eventually you will discover that many emotional habits survive only because they remain unquestioned. Once questioned seriously, they weaken. You must understand that freedom is not gained by arranging perfect external conditions. Freedom is gained when your judgments no longer tyrannize your mind. A person who cannot examine their thoughts remains vulnerable to every emotional disturbance, but a person trained in reason develops stability that circumstances struggle to shake. This does not mean becoming emotionless. It means refusing to become ruled by emotion. Pain will still visit you. Disappointment will still arrive. Grief will still touch your life. But disciplined judgment prevents suffering from becoming chaos. You stop multiplying pain through interpretation. You stop feeding fear through imagination. You stop surrendering peace to every passing thought. Instead, you begin standing guard at the entrance of your own mind. Not every thought deserves agreement. Not every emotion deserves expression. Not every judgment deserves permanence. This vigilance becomes a form of inner strength. You no longer react blindly. You become slower to anger and quicker to examine. You become less dependent on praise because your worth no longer fluctuates with opinion. You become less frightened by uncertainty because you trust your ability to respond with reason. Your entire life begins changing from the inside outward. Relationships improve because fewer assumptions poison them. Work improves because emotional distraction loses power. Peace increases because mental noise decreases. Discipline strengthens because excuses are examined instead of indulged. You begin living deliberately rather than mechanically, and understand this clearly. The battle for your life is happening inside your judgments every single day, not someday in the future, not during dramatic moments alone. Right now, in the silent decisions your mind keeps making automatically. Every judgment accepted without examination shapes who you become. So slow down enough to think honestly. Question your reactions before obeying them. Separate fact from interpretation. Return constantly to reason. And remember that a disciplined life is not built through grand declarations, but through thousands of examined judgments made carefully day after day. Your character is being formed already. The only question is whether you will finally take responsibility for shaping it consciously before habit shapes it for you. Number 3. Govern your desires by reason and virtue alone. You keep calling it desire as if it is harmless. It is not harmless. It is the force that quietly governs your choices long before you ever think you are making a decision. You do not act from reason most of the time. You act from wanting. And what you want is rarely examined, rarely questioned, and almost never governed by anything higher than impulse dressed up as necessity. Look at your ordinary day with complete honesty. You wake up and desire immediately begins to speak. It tells you what would make you comfortable. It tells you what would make you respected. It tells you what would make you feel superior or safe or entertained or admired. And because you do not challenge it, you begin serving it, not deliberately, not consciously, but steadily. Moment by moment you obey it. This is how a life loses direction without ever noticing the moment it happened. Desire is not your enemy when it is governed. It becomes destructive when it governs you. The problem is not that you want things. The problem is that you have not placed reason above wanting. You have not asked whether the thing you chase strengthens your character or weakens it. You have not asked whether it belongs to what is within your control or whether it drags your attention toward what never was. A mind ruled by desire confuses intensity with truth. The stronger the craving, the more real it feels. But intensity is not evidence, it is pressure, and pressure without reason produces distortion. You want approval and call it social survival. You want comfort and call it self-care. You want pleasure and call it living. You want escape and call it rest. But these names do not change what is happening inside you. You are repeatedly choosing reactions over reason because desire arrives faster than reflection. This is why your life feels scattered, not because the world is chaotic, but because your desires are unorganized and ungoverned. Each one pulls you in a different direction. Each one demands urgency. Each one promises satisfaction if only you obey it immediately. And you obey because you have not trained yourself to question whether obedience is wise. Begin here with brutal clarity. Not everything you want deserves your attention. Not every impulse deserves expression. Not every craving deserves pursuit. Some desires weaken your mind the more you feed them. Some desires shrink your discipline each time you obey them. Some desires make you less capable of facing reality with courage. You already know this in moments of honesty. After indulgence, there is often emptiness. After impulsive reactions, there is often regret. After chasing approval, there is often exhaustion. The pattern is not hidden. It is simply ignored. Reason exists to interrupt this cycle. Reason does not eliminate desire. Reason evaluates it. It asks whether what you want aligns with your nature as a rational being. It asks whether this desire produces stability or dependence. It asks whether this desire increases your ability to act with justice, discipline, and clarity, or whether it pulls you into disorder. When you ignore reason, desire becomes a tyrant. When you obey reason, desire becomes a tool. Most suffering does not come from the absence of what you want. It comes from the uncontrolled pursuit of what you want. You begin believing that peace lies just beyond the next achievement, the next purchase, the next relationship, the next validation. So you chase, and while chasing you become blind to the instability created by chasing itself. You do not notice how often you trade inner stability for temporary excitement. You do not notice how often you sacrifice discipline for immediate relief. You do not notice how often you abandon reason for emotional gratification. And then you wonder why satisfaction never lasts. Desire is designed to move you, but not to guide you. If it guides you, it leads you without limit. There is no natural stopping point inside craving. It always expands. It always demands more. What begins as preference becomes dependence. What begins as enjoyment becomes necessity. What begins as interest becomes compulsion. A disciplined life begins when you stop asking, "What do I want right now?" and start asking, "What is worth wanting at all?" This shift changes everything because it replaces urgency with reflection. It forces you to slow down the automatic movement of the mind. It interrupts the habit of chasing without inspection. You are not weak because desire exists in you. You are untrained because desire has never been examined by reason consistently enough to lose its authority. Start observing how quickly desire speaks in your life. A notification appears and you want to respond immediately. A thought of pleasure arises and you want to act immediately. A memory of offense appears and you want to retaliate immediately. A vision of future success appears and you want to rush toward it immediately. This immediacy is the problem. It leaves no space for judgment. Between impulse and action, there must be a pause governed by reason. Without this pause, you are not choosing, you are reacting. To govern desire by reason means to introduce structure into your inner world. It means establishing a rule that no impulse is obeyed without examination. It means refusing to trust the first voice that appears in your mind simply because it is loud or urgent. Ask yourself clearly each time desire appears, is this aligned with virtue or only with comfort? Does this strengthen my ability to act justly, or does it pull me toward indulgence? Does this increase my freedom or reduce it? Freedom is not the ability to obtain everything you want. Freedom is the ability to refuse what weakens you. Many people misunderstand this completely. They believe freedom is expansion of choice. But without reason, expanded choice becomes expanded vulnerability. The more desires you serve without question, the less control you actually have over your life. You become reactive to whatever arises inside you rather than deliberate in how you respond. A person governed by reason does not eliminate desire. They reorganize it. They place higher value on desires that support character and lower value on desires that create dependency. They train themselves to distinguish between what feels urgent and what is actually important. Urgency is often the language of unchecked impulse. Importance is the language of reason. When you feel strong desire, do not immediately suppress it. Examine it. Look at it directly. Ask where it leads if followed fully. Not just the first moment of satisfaction, but the full chain of consequences. Many desires collapse under this kind of honest inspection. You crave praise until you see how fragile you become when praise controls your mood. You crave comfort until you see how quickly comfort weakens endurance. You crave control over others until you see how exhausting it is to depend on their behavior for your peace. Reason does not need to shout. It only needs to reveal consequences clearly. Desire often survives because people avoid looking far enough ahead. The disciplined person refuses this avoidance. They extend their thinking beyond immediate gratification. They consider what kind of person they become if they continue obeying a specific desire repeatedly. Because every repeated action shapes identity more than intention ever does. You are not defined by what you want. You are defined by what you repeatedly choose. This is why governing desire is not about restriction for its own sake. It is about shaping character. Every time you choose reason over impulse, you strengthen your capacity to govern yourself. Every time you choose impulse over reason, you weaken that capacity. There is no neutral ground. Either reason gains authority or desire does. Begin in the morning before the day scatters your attention. Do not immediately feed desire with distraction. Sit quietly and set direction for the mind. Decide in advance that you will not obey every impulse that appears. Decide that comfort will not automatically dictate your actions. Decide that emotional intensity will not replace rational judgment. This early discipline creates a foundation for the rest of the day. Without it, you enter life defenseless against internal impulses. During the day, when desire appears, slow down your response. Even a brief pause changes the entire structure of action. In that pause, reason has a chance to speak. Without it, desire acts alone. You will notice how often desire disguises itself as necessity. It tells you that you must react now. That delay is dangerous. That restraint is unnatural. These are tactics of impulse, not truths of reason. Nothing virtuous requires immediate surrender to emotion. At night, review where desire governed you instead of reason. Do not approach this with shame. Approach it with clarity. Identify moments where you acted without examination. Identify moments where comfort replaced discipline. Identify moments where impulse made decisions on your behalf. This review is not punishment. It is training. You are learning to see the structure of your own mind so you can reshape it. Over time, something changes. Desire loses its authority, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer automatically obeyed. It becomes one voice among others, not the ruler of your inner life. Reason becomes the guiding force that evaluates all requests before action is taken. This is what it means to govern yourself, not suppression of life, not rejection of feeling, but disciplined leadership of the mind. A life ruled by unexamined desire is a life constantly pulled outward, never stable, never complete. A life governed by reason is steady even in uncertainty because it is not dependent on whatever arises internally or externally. And when you begin to live this way, you no longer ask how to satisfy every desire. You begin asking which desires deserve to live at all. That question marks the beginning of real freedom. Number 4. Accept events you cannot change without complaint. You do not suffer because life is harsh. You suffer because you keep arguing with what has already happened. In your mind, you replay events that are already complete and demand that they become different. You resist outcomes that cannot be reversed. You speak internally as if refusal could alter reality. And in that refusal, you create a second layer of suffering that nature never imposed on you. Nothing destroys peace faster than the habit of rejecting what is already real. Look closely at your daily reactions. Something fails and immediately the mind says this should not be happening. Someone disappoints you and the mind says this is unfair. A plan collapses and the mind says this is unacceptable. These inner statements feel natural, but they are the beginning of disturbance, because once you declare that reality should be different from what it is, you enter conflict with existence itself, and no one wins that conflict. The world does not negotiate with your preferences. Events unfold according to causes far beyond your control. People act according to their own nature. Bodies weaken, systems shift, timing fails. Chance interferes. None of this waits for your approval. Yet you continue to respond as if disapproval could undo what has already been fixed in time. This is the origin of complaint. Not injustice itself, but the refusal to accept what cannot be changed. Complaint is not harmless expression. It is a mental habit that trains the mind to resist reality instead of understanding it. Each complaint strengthens the expectation that life should obey your desires. Each complaint deepens frustration when life inevitably refuses. Over time, you begin living in permanent tension between what is and what you insist should be. That tension becomes your normal state. You call it stress, you call it pressure, you call it frustration. But beneath those names is something simpler, a mind constantly resisting reality instead of responding to it. The disciplined mind begins by breaking this pattern at its root. It learns to distinguish between what can be changed and what cannot. Not as theory, but as immediate perception in the moment of disturbance. When an event occurs, the first question is not "why did this happen?" The first question is there anything here that depends on my choice right now? If there is, attention goes there completely. If there is not, resistance ends immediately. This separation is not emotional comfort, it is practical intelligence. Because energy spent resisting the unchangeable is energy stolen from what can still be acted upon. Every moment you spend complaining about what is fixed is a moment you refuse to use for what is still open to your influence. You lose nothing by accepting reality. You lose everything by fighting it. Yet acceptance is often misunderstood. People think acceptance means approval. It does not. Acceptance simply means seeing clearly without distortion. It means refusing to lie to yourself about what has already occurred. It means stopping the mental habit of pretending that resistance is action. You can acknowledge loss without endorsing it. You can recognize failure without identifying with it. You can observe difficulty without collapsing into it. What you cannot do is change it by refusing to accept it. The past is complete. Your reaction to it is still forming. This is where your true power exists. Most suffering does not come from the event itself, but from the continuation of mental conflict after the event is finished. A conversation ends, yet you continue arguing internally. A mistake is made, yet you continue punishing yourself mentally. A situation resolves, yet you continue replaying it as if repetition could rewrite it. This is where complaint becomes internal rather than spoken. Even silent complaint is still resistance. It keeps the mind locked in opposition to reality rather than aligned with it. Alignment does not mean passivity, it means clarity. It means acting only where action is possible and releasing everything else without distortion. Begin by observing how quickly your mind tries to rewrite events. Notice how often you insert the thought, "this should not be happening." This phrase is the root of disturbance. It transforms simple reality into emotional conflict. Without it, events are neutral facts. With it, they become personal violations. You are not disturbed by events. You are disturbed by your judgments about events. A delayed outcome is only delay. A rejection is only information. A mistake is only feedback. A loss is only separation. None of these contain inherent suffering until your judgment adds resistance. When you say "this should not be happening," you create internal division. One part of you recognizes reality, another part rejects it. That split becomes mental friction. The mind becomes occupied with opposition instead of understanding. Understanding restores order. Opposition creates chaos. The disciplined life begins with removing unnecessary opposition, not by suppressing thought, but by correcting judgment. In the morning, prepare your mind for this practice before the day introduces events that will test it. Remind yourself that nothing today will happen outside of nature. People will act according to their character. Circumstances will unfold according to causes already set in motion. Your responsibility is not to control these outcomes, but to meet them with reason rather than resistance. This preparation prevents surprise from becoming suffering. When you expect reality to include difficulty, difficulty loses its power to shock you into complaint. During the day, when something occurs that you dislike, pause before forming judgment. The first reaction of resistance will appear automatically. That is not failure, that is habit. Your discipline begins in what you do next. Do not immediately declare the situation wrong. Do not immediately mentally protest. Instead, separate fact from interpretation. What has actually happened without emotional language? What part of this is simply reality? What part of this is your judgment demanding something different? This separation is critical, because most suffering comes not from facts, but from the stories attached to facts. A person ignores your effort, fact. Interpretation says this is disrespect and therefore unacceptable. A plan changes, fact. Interpretation says this is injustice and therefore intolerable. Someone disagrees with you, fact. Interpretation says this is personal rejection and therefore painful. The facts remain stable. Interpretation creates disturbance. When you see this clearly, complaint begins to lose authority. It becomes obvious that complaining does not change facts. It only strengthens inner unrest. There is another form of complaint that is more subtle. It is internal resignation disguised as reflection. The mind says this is just how things always go. This is my luck. This is my life. These statements feel like acceptance, but they are actually quiet resistance because they carry judgment about reality as something inherently against you. True acceptance carries no hostility toward existence. It simply recognizes what is present and responds appropriately. A disciplined mind does not label reality as good or bad before understanding it. It first sees clearly. Only after clarity does action arise. This clarity creates stability even in difficult circumstances, because stability no longer depends on external conditions aligning with preference. Stability comes from internal agreement with reality as it is. You are no longer split between what is happening and what you think should be happening. The mind becomes unified. Energy that was once wasted in resistance becomes available for action. This is why acceptance is not weakness. It is strength, freed from unnecessary struggle. You begin to notice that most complaints arise from attachment to outcomes you never controlled in the first place. You wanted people to respond differently. You wanted events to unfold according to plan. You wanted uncertainty to disappear. But none of these were ever under your authority. By expecting control over what was never yours, you created constant disappointment. When you release that expectation, disappointment loses its foundation. At night, examine where complaint entered your thinking during the day, not to shame yourself, but to understand the mechanism. Where did you resist what had already occurred? Where did you mentally argue with reality? Where did you delay acceptance and therefore prolong disturbance? This review trains awareness. Awareness weakens automatic resistance. Over time, you begin catching complaint earlier and earlier until it loses its grip almost entirely. The goal is not emotional numbness. The goal is mental accuracy. To see events as they are before interpreting them as insults or obstacles to your peace. A life without complaint is not a life without difficulty. It is a life without unnecessary suffering added on top of difficulty. Hardship remains, loss remains, change remains, but the mind no longer multiplies these experiences through resistance. You act where action is possible. You accept where action is not possible, and you refuse to waste energy in between those two states. This is the discipline of living in agreement with reality instead of constantly fighting it. And when this becomes your practice, something fundamental shifts. Life is no longer experienced as a series of personal offenses. It becomes a field of events requiring steady judgment. You stop asking why reality does not obey your preferences and start asking how you should respond with clarity and virtue. That shift is the beginning of inner freedom, because a person who no longer complains about what cannot be changed has already reclaimed their mind from unnecessary suffering. Number 5. Practice discomfort daily to strengthen your character. You keep protecting yourself from discomfort as if comfort were proof of a good life. It is not. Comfort is only absence of resistance in the moment, not evidence of strength in the soul. And a life built around avoiding discomfort quietly produces a mind that cannot endure anything difficult without collapsing inward. You already see the signs of this in yourself if you are honest. A slight inconvenience irritates you. A small delay frustrates you. A difficult conversation feels like something to escape rather than face. You avoid situations that require patience, effort, or emotional control, then wonder why your character feels fragile when life inevitably demands resilience. Nothing in nature trains strength through ease, yet you have tried to build your life as if avoidance of difficulty could produce inner stability. This is the contradiction at the center of your suffering. You want discipline without pressure, courage without challenge, clarity without struggle, but the mind cannot be sharpened without friction. Discomfort is not punishment, it is training material for the rational self. Every time you avoid discomfort, you are not protecting yourself. You are weakening your ability to govern yourself. Because character is not formed in moments of comfort where nothing is demanded of you. Character is revealed and strengthened only when something inside you resists what must be done, and you choose reason anyway. Your reactions today are shaped by your refusal yesterday to face small forms of discomfort. The avoidance of difficulty becomes habit. The habit becomes weakness. The weakness becomes identity. Then life feels harder than it actually is because your capacity to meet it has been reduced through neglect. This is why the disciplined life does not begin with motivation. It begins with voluntary exposure to what you naturally avoid. Not extreme suffering, not reckless hardship, but deliberate, controlled discomfort that trains the mind to stop obeying softness. When you choose the easier path every time, you teach your mind that difficulty is unacceptable. When difficulty inevitably arrives without your permission, you react with frustration because you were never trained to remain steady in it. You created a mind that expects life to accommodate comfort at all times. Reality never agreed to that expectation, so you suffer not because life is harsh, but because your threshold for difficulty has been lowered by repeated avoidance. To strengthen character, you must reverse this pattern deliberately. You must introduce controlled discomfort into your life, not as punishment, but as practice. Each act of voluntary discomfort becomes a correction to a mind that has been overprotected from effort. Begin with awareness of your first reaction. The mind will resist even small inconvenience. It will suggest delay. It will suggest avoidance. It will suggest easier alternatives. This is not wisdom speaking, it is habit defending itself. If you obey that habit automatically, nothing changes. If you pause and choose discipline anyway, the structure of your mind begins to shift. There is a moment before every avoided action where discomfort appears. That moment is the true battlefield, not after suffering has increased, but before it begins. You feel resistance before speaking honestly. You feel resistance before completing difficult work. You feel resistance before facing responsibility. That resistance is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that growth is available. The mind that always obeys comfort never develops authority over itself. It becomes reactive rather than governed. It moves according to immediate ease rather than considered judgment. And a life ruled by immediate ease eventually loses direction entirely. You do not need more ease. You need more capacity to remain steady when ease is not available. Discomfort reveals where your control actually is. You cannot control whether effort feels unpleasant. You can control whether you act despite that unpleasantness. You cannot control whether discipline feels heavy in the moment. You can control whether you submit to that heaviness or continue anyway. The difference between weakness and strength lies in that single decision. Most people misunderstand this. They believe strong people feel less discomfort. This is false. Strong people experience discomfort fully, but refuse to treat it as authority. They do not negotiate with it, they do not obey it, they observe it and proceed according to reason. Your mind will tell you that discomfort means something is wrong. This is a false interpretation. Discomfort often simply means you are resisting a necessary action. It means you are leaving the boundary of habitual ease. It means you are entering territory where growth is possible. If you interpret discomfort as danger, you will retreat. If you interpret it as training, you will advance. Begin your day by preparing for this truth. Before any task begins, remind yourself that today will contain moments where you will want to avoid difficulty. This is not prediction of failure, it is preparation for discipline. You are acknowledging in advance that your mind will attempt to prioritize comfort over reason. By expecting this, you reduce its power over you. During the day, when discomfort arises, do not immediately react by escaping it. Instead, pause long enough to recognize the choice being offered. The choice is not between comfort and pain. The choice is between discipline and avoidance, between governance of the self and surrender to impulse. This distinction matters because it removes confusion. You are not choosing whether discomfort exists. It already exists. You are choosing how to respond to it. Many moments of growth are hidden inside ordinary resistance. Finishing what you started when you feel like stopping, speaking truth when silence would feel easier, remaining patient when irritation pushes for reaction, staying present when distraction feels more pleasant. Each of these is a training ground for inner strength. When you consistently choose avoidance, you reinforce fragility. When you consistently choose disciplined action despite discomfort, you reinforce stability. This is how character is built without dramatic events, not through crisis alone, but through repeated small victories over the desire to escape effort. You must also examine the judgments that arise when discomfort appears. Often the mind adds narrative to it. It says this is too hard. It says this should not be necessary. It says I should not have to deal with this. These judgments increase resistance and transform manageable difficulty into emotional burden. Remove these judgments. Replace them with clarity. This is difficult. It is here. It requires response. That is all. Clarity reduces suffering. Judgment multiplies it. At times, discomfort will involve emotional strain, difficult conversations, honest reflection, facing your own weaknesses without avoidance. In these moments, the instinct will be to postpone awareness, but postponement only extends inner disorder. The longer you avoid discomfort, the stronger it becomes in imagination. Face it directly, and it loses inflated power. You will notice that most fears about discomfort are exaggerated before action and reduced after engagement. The anticipation is often worse than the reality. This pattern exists because the mind creates resistance in advance to protect comfort. But once action begins, reality replaces imagination and clarity returns. This is why action must come before overthinking. Thought alone amplifies resistance. Action dissolves it. Each time you choose disciplined discomfort, you expand your capacity for future difficulty. The mind learns that discomfort is survivable, not only survivable but useful. It begins to stop overreacting to it. Emotional intensity decreases because resistance decreases. You become less fragile without becoming less human. There is also a deeper shift that occurs over time. You begin to respect yourself more, not because you feel better, but because you act with greater integrity. You no longer abandon your responsibilities at the first sign of resistance. You no longer negotiate with avoidance every time effort is required. You begin to trust your own decisions under pressure. Self-trust is built through repeated alignment with reason during moments of discomfort. When you fail in this practice, do not turn failure into identity. Observe it precisely. You chose comfort over discipline in that moment. Understand why. Identify the judgment that led to it. then correct it next time. Self-governance is not built through perfection, it is built through correction. At the end of each day, review where you avoided necessary discomfort. Not to shame yourself, but to sharpen awareness. Where did you choose ease over responsibility? Where did you delay action due to discomfort? Where did you rationalize avoidance? This review is how you train the mind to recognize its own patterns before they control you automatically. Over time, something changes quietly but permanently. Discomfort loses its authority over your decisions. It still appears, but it no longer commands behavior. You stop treating it as a warning to retreat and start treating it as a signal to engage with reason. Life does not become easier. You become more capable, and that is the only true form of strength available to you. A mind that can remain steady in discomfort is no longer dependent on favorable conditions. It carries its stability within itself. That is what it means to govern your life rather than be governed by it. Number 6. Act rightly even when fear demands silence. Fear does not arrive to warn you about danger as much as it arrives to negotiate your silence. It presses against your mind at the exact moment when action is required and tells you to delay, to hide, to avoid, to remain unseen. And if you do not recognize it for what it is, you begin to confuse fear with wisdom. You begin to call hesitation caution. You begin to call silence safety. And slowly, without noticing, you start living beneath the level of your own integrity. You already know what it feels like to abandon right action under pressure. A moment arises where you should speak truth, but fear tightens the mind and you remain quiet. The situation demands honesty, but fear suggests that honesty will cost too much. An injustice appears in front of you, but fear whispers that involvement will disturb your comfort. Each time this happens, you do not simply avoid difficulty, you abandon a piece of your own character. And that abandonment does not disappear. It accumulates. Fear is not dangerous because it exists. Fear is dangerous because it asks you to postpone virtue. It convinces you that moral action can wait until conditions are safer, easier, or more convenient. But virtue does not operate on permission from comfort. It operates on reason, and reason does not delay what is right simply because discomfort is present. The real question is never whether fear is present. Fear will always appear when something matters. The real question is whether you allow fear to override your judgment. Most people think they are choosing silence. They are not. They are reacting to internal pressure without examination. The mind produces an image of consequence, and without questioning that image, they retreat. They imagine rejection, embarrassment, loss, or conflict, and treat those imagined outcomes as more important than the actual principle at stake in the moment. This is how fear governs a life that believes it is still free. Look closely at the pattern. You see what is right to do. You recognize what honesty requires. You understand what courage would look like. But instead of acting, you begin negotiating with fear. You ask what will happen if you speak. You ask how others will respond. You ask whether discomfort can be avoided. And in that negotiation, reason slowly loses authority. A disciplined mind does not negotiate with fear. It examines it. Fear is only an impression. It is a prediction about future suffering that may or may not occur, yet you treat it as certainty. You allow a mental projection to dictate present behavior. This is the root of cowardice, not the absence of strength, but the surrender of judgment to imagined outcomes. Right action becomes impossible when imagined consequences are given more weight than present duty. The life of integrity begins when you separate what belongs to you from what does not in moments of fear. The opinion of others does not belong to you. Their approval does not belong to you. Their reaction does not belong to you. Their misunderstanding does not belong to you. What belongs to you is the choice to act according to reason and justice, regardless of their response. When fear arises, It always attaches itself to what is not yours. It tells you that external reactions define your safety, your worth, your stability. But none of these are within your control. And yet you continue to sacrifice what is within your control, your judgment, your action, your integrity, in order to avoid outcomes that were never yours to govern in the first place. This exchange is always a loss. Each time you choose silence where truth was required, you train your mind to value comfort over correctness. Each time you avoid action because of fear, you strengthen the belief that fear is a reliable guide. Over time, this becomes habitual. The mind begins to treat fear as authority. It no longer questions whether fear is accurate. It simply obeys it. This is how a person becomes internally divided. They know what is right, yet repeatedly act in contradiction to it. That contradiction creates tension within the self, and that tension is experienced as anxiety, dissatisfaction, and inner instability. You do not suffer only from external circumstances. You suffer from the gap between what you recognize as right and what you actually do under fear. To close that gap, you must act before fear is allowed to finalize its argument. Fear is persuasive because it speaks in urgency. It says now is not the right time. It says wait until you are stronger. It says avoid risk until certainty appears. But reason recognizes that certainty never arrives in advance. Action always occurs in uncertainty. Courage is not the absence of uncertainty. It is action aligned with judgment despite uncertainty. You do not need fear to disappear before you act rightly. You need clarity about what action is required, regardless of fear's presence. Begin your morning by setting this standard clearly. Decide in advance that fear will not determine your actions today. Not because fear will be absent, but because it will not be allowed to govern your behavior. Establish that your role is to act according to reason, not according to emotional pressure. This preparation creates distance between impulse and decision. Without it, fear meets you unprepared and immediately influences behavior. With it, you enter the day with an established boundary. Fear may appear, but it will not command. During the day, when fear arises, do not argue with it emotionally. Observe it as a reaction, not as instruction. Identify the judgment behind it. Fear always contains a hidden judgment about what must be avoided at all costs. Examine whether that judgment is rational or exaggerated. Often you will find that fear predicts social discomfort, loss of approval, or temporary embarrassment. These are not threats to your character. They are conditions you experience, not identities you become. The mind inflates them into danger because it has not been trained to separate discomfort from harm. You must correct this confusion repeatedly. Discomfort is not damage. Criticism is not destruction. Disapproval is not danger. These are experiences, not definitions of your worth. When you recognize this, fear begins to lose its authority. Right action then becomes simpler. You no longer ask whether fear is present. You ask whether justice, honesty, or responsibility requires action. If it does, you act regardless of internal resistance. This is where true strength appears, not in the absence of fear, but in the refusal to let fear interrupt moral clarity. You will notice that fear often tries to disguise itself as prudence. It says you are being careful. It says you are being strategic. It says you are waiting for a better moment. But excessive waiting is often just avoidance dressed in rational language. A disciplined mind tests this carefully. It asks whether delay is truly necessary, or whether it is simply fear extending its influence. Many of the actions you postpone are not postponed because timing is wrong. They are postponed because discomfort is present. And discomfort alone is not a valid reason to abandon right action. At night, examine where fear influenced your behavior. Look not only at actions taken, but at actions avoided. Where did you remain silent when truth was needed? Where did you withdraw when engagement was required? Where did you choose safety over integrity? Do not judge yourself emotionally during this review. Observe factually. The purpose is not guilt. The purpose is recognition of patterns that can be corrected. You are not trying to become someone without fear. You are training yourself to no longer obey fear. There is a crucial difference. Fear will continue to arise throughout your life. That is natural. What changes is its authority. At first it commands you. With practice it becomes only an input. Eventually it becomes a signal that must be evaluated rather than followed. This transformation does not happen through inspiration. It happens through repeated action aligned with reason in moments where fear is present. Each time you act rightly despite fear, you strengthen internal governance. Each time you submit to fear against reason, you weaken it. The direction of your life is determined by these repeated choices, not by isolated intentions. Over time, something stabilizes within you. You stop living reactively to imagined consequences. You begin acting from principle rather than pressure. You no longer define safety as avoidance of discomfort, but as alignment with virtue. This shift is subtle but decisive, because once your standard becomes right action instead of comfortable action, fear loses its central role in your decisions. You still feel it, but it no longer leads. And in that space between feeling and action, reason finally becomes the governing force of your life. Number 7. Recall death each morning and waste nothing. You move through your days as if time is an unlimited resource that will always be available for correction later. You postpone what is necessary. You delay what is honest. You avoid what is difficult. And in doing so, you quietly assume that tomorrow will always arrive with the same openness as today. That assumption is the root of your carelessness, and it is the reason your life often feels unfinished, even when your calendar is full. You do not waste life in one dramatic moment. You waste it in small delays, repeated endlessly, justified by the belief that there will always be more time to act correctly later. Now confront something you usually avoid thinking about directly. Your existence is not guaranteed beyond this moment, not as fear but as fact. Every breath you take is already extended beyond what you control. Every day you wake is not owed to you, it is simply given without explanation. And yet you behave as if this pattern will continue indefinitely, as if time itself is obligated to wait for your readiness. This illusion is what allows procrastination to feel harmless. It is not harmless. It is the slow erosion of urgency in a life that depends entirely on urgency for its integrity. When you forget the limit of your time, you lose the seriousness required to live well. You begin to treat your attention carelessly. You engage in meaningless distraction without noticing what it costs. You hold conversations without presence. You perform tasks without intention. You think without clarity. And you call this normal living. But a mind that forgets its finitude becomes soft, unfocused, and easily diverted. The disciplined mind begins each day with a different awareness. Not anxiety, not fear, but clarity that time is not guaranteed. This awareness does not weaken life. It sharpens it. It removes illusion and replaces it with focus. When you remember that your time is limited, every action gains weight. Every choice becomes meaningful. Every moment becomes an opportunity that will not repeat. This is not a morbid thought. It is a corrective one. It brings your attention back to what matters instead of what distracts. Most people live as if death belongs only to others. They observe it externally but never integrate it internally. They see it as distant, theoretical, irrelevant to daily behavior. Because of this distance, they allow trivial matters to dominate their attention. They argue over things that do not endure. They chase approval that disappears. They accumulate possessions that will be left behind, and they call this progress. But if you place your life under the awareness of its limit, you begin to see how much of your time is spent on what does not deserve it. Recall death each morning, not to produce fear, but to remove illusion. The point is not to become anxious about the end. The point is to become serious about the present. When you understand that your time is finite, you stop negotiating with distraction. You stop postponing responsibility. You stop treating your attention as something cheap. You begin to see that every moment is a choice between using your life or wasting it. Waste does not always look obvious. It rarely appears as obvious destruction. More often, it appears as repetition without awareness, scrolling without intention, speaking without meaning, reacting without thought, complaining without correction, planning without execution. Each of these seems small in isolation, but together they form the structure of a neglected life. When you are not aware of death, you allow these moments to accumulate without consequence in your mind. But when you are aware of death, even small moments demand responsibility. This awareness changes your relationship with action. You no longer act as if you can always correct later. You begin to act as if each moment carries its own finality, not because life is ending now, but because you recognize that any moment could be the one where opportunity closes. This shifts your attention from endless delay to immediate presence. The undisciplined mind uses imagined future time as justification for present negligence. It says there will be time to speak honestly later. There will be time to fix habits later. There will be time to live correctly later, but later is never guaranteed. And even when it arrives with new distractions that repeat the same delay. So nothing changes. The disciplined mind breaks this cycle by refusing to rely on imaginary future conditions. It acts from the reality of now. It asks what is required in this moment, not what might be possible someday. Begin your morning by bringing your attention directly to this fact. You are alive now without certainty of continuation. This is not a threat. It is a condition of existence shared by all human beings. From this condition arises responsibility. Before the day pulls you into noise, decide that you will not waste the time given to you. Not in grand declarations, but in practical alignment. Decide that attention will not be surrendered to what has no value. Decide that effort will not be postponed when action is required. Decide that your life will be used rather than diluted. This decision must be renewed daily because the mind forgets quickly. It drifts back into assumption. It returns to comfort. It loses urgency unless it is reminded. During the day, observe how easily your attention fragments. Notice how often you engage in activities that produce no meaningful development of character or clarity. Not to shame yourself, but to recognize how quickly life becomes scattered without conscious direction. When you catch yourself in wasteful attention, do not collapse into guilt. Correct the direction immediately. Return to what matters. The power is not in never drifting. The power is in returning quickly and deliberately. This return is where discipline lives. As you continue this practice, you begin to notice a change in perception. Time feels more present. Actions feel more deliberate. Words carry more weight. You stop speaking loosely because you recognize that speech is a use of time. You stop delaying responsibility because delay becomes visible as loss rather than neutrality. You begin to treat your day as something finite and therefore valuable. At night, examine how you used the hours given to you. Not with judgment that weakens you, but with clarity that strengthens awareness. Where did attention serve purpose? Where did it dissolve into distraction? Where did you act with intention? Where did you drift without noticing? This examination is not about regret. It is about recognition. Recognition builds awareness. Awareness builds correction. Correction builds discipline. Through this practice, you begin to see a pattern. Wasted time is rarely the result of one large failure. It is the result of many small moments where awareness was absent, moments where you forgot that your life is happening now, not in some imagined future where everything will be easier. The awareness of death removes the illusion of endless postponement. It forces honesty into your relationship with time. It reveals that every delay has cost, not dramatic cost, but real cost, measured in lost presence, lost action, lost clarity. When you understand this, urgency becomes natural. Not frantic urgency, but steady seriousness. You stop living casually with your own existence. You begin to choose actions that align with what is meaningful rather than what is merely convenient. You begin to speak with intention rather than reaction. You begin to listen with presence rather than distraction. You begin to act as if your life is something being actively used rather than passively consumed. This shift does not make life heavier. It makes it clearer. You no longer feel as though time is slipping unnoticed because you are now participating in it consciously. Each moment becomes a place where you either live deliberately or waste quietly. There is no neutral state. Either your attention is aligned with purpose or it is dispersed into irrelevance. The remembrance of death removes the comfort of illusion that says otherwise. And once this illusion is removed, a simple truth becomes visible. You already have enough time to live rightly if you stop wasting what is already here. The problem is not shortage of time. The problem is misused time. So begin again each morning with awareness of finitude. Let it sharpen your attention without disturbing your calm. Let it remind you that what matters is not endless preparation, but present action aligned with reason. And when distraction appears, when delay tempts you, when comfort suggests postponement, return immediately to this understanding. You are not guaranteed later. You are only responsible for now. That is enough to change how you live entirely. A mind that remembers this no longer drifts through life unconsciously. It wakes up inside each moment and uses it deliberately. Number 8. Guard your mind from noise and idle opinion. You do not lose your peace in dramatic moments. You lose it in small, repeated exposures to noise that you never question. A comment you did not need to read, an opinion you did not need to accept, a comparison you did not need to make, a stream of voices that have no responsibility for your life yet steadily shape how you think about it. And without noticing, your mind becomes less your own and more a collection of external fragments you never chose with intention. This is how inner disorder begins, not through catastrophe, but through uncontrolled intake. You treat attention as if it were limitless, as if every voice deserves space inside your mind. But not every voice is truth. Not every opinion is wisdom. Not every reaction you encounter deserves to become a reaction within you. Yet you keep allowing external noise to enter without examination, and then you wonder why your thinking feels unstable and fragmented. A mind that does not guard itself becomes occupied by whatever is loudest, not whatever is true. Noise does not require physical sound. It can exist in conversation, in media, in rumor, in constant commentary about how life should be lived according to people who are not responsible for your choices. Idle opinion is especially dangerous because it appears harmless. It feels like information, but it often carries judgment without understanding, reaction without reflection, certainty without discipline. When you consume this without awareness, you begin to inherit judgments that were never yours. You start evaluating your life through standards you did not examine. You begin measuring yourself against expectations you did not choose. You react to situations based on interpretations that were planted by repetition rather than reason. Slowly, your inner dialogue becomes crowded with voices that do not belong to you, and your own clarity becomes harder to hear. This is why guarding the mind is not optional. It is a form of self-respect. The disciplined person understands that attention is not passive. It is the substance of consciousness. Whatever you allow into your attention begins to shape your judgment, and judgment shapes reaction, and reaction shapes character. Therefore, what enters your mind is not neutral. It is formative. You are being shaped constantly by what you consume without resistance. Most people assume they are thinking independently while actually repeating what they have absorbed from constant exposure. Opinions become echoes, reactions become habits, preferences become borrowed, and then they call this personality. But much of it is simply accumulation of unfiltered external influence. To guard the mind is to interrupt this accumulation. Begin by recognizing that you are not obligated to engage with everything that appears in your awareness. Every piece of information does not require response. Every opinion does not require consideration. Every emotional expression from others does not require internal adoption. You have the ability to pause before letting external input become internal belief. That pause is where discipline lives. When noise enters your awareness, do not immediately interpret it as meaningful. Ask whether it contributes to clarity or whether it only adds agitation. Ask whether it strengthens your capacity to act with reason or whether it pulls you into comparison, judgment, or unnecessary reaction. Much of what you encounter in daily life does not pass this test, yet you continue to consume it as if all input were equally valuable. This lack of discrimination weakens your ability to think independently, because a mind filled with unexamined voices loses the space required for clear reasoning. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is clarity without interference. When your mind is constantly filled with external commentary, your own judgment becomes difficult to distinguish. You begin reacting to imagined expectations rather than actual reality. You begin forming opinions before understanding situations fully. You begin feeling pressure from directions that have nothing to do with your actual responsibilities. This is the cost of uncontrolled mental intake. Guarding your mind begins in the morning, before the day introduces noise. Decide in advance that your attention will not be surrendered without purpose. Establish that what enters your awareness must serve clarity or discipline, not distraction or comparison. This decision is not about isolation from the world. It is about selective engagement with it. You still encounter information. You still interact with people. You still observe opinions, but you no longer allow everything to become internalized. You learn to filter experience through reason before it becomes judgment. During the day, observe how quickly external input tries to become internal reaction. A comment appears and immediately the mind wants to respond emotionally. A comparison arises and immediately self-evaluation begins. A piece of news appears and immediately anxiety follows. This chain happens so fast that it feels automatic. But automatic does not mean necessary. Between input and reaction, there is always a space where reason can intervene. Most people never use this space. They allow immediate absorption. They treat every stimulus as instruction. But disciplined attention creates a boundary. It observes before agreeing. It listens without surrendering judgment. It receives without losing stability. This is how mental independence is built. You must also examine the internal noise that remains even when external noise is reduced, because even in silence the mind can continue producing unnecessary commentary. It replays conversations. It constructs imagined judgments from others. It creates scenarios that do not exist. It repeats concerns without resolution. This internal noise is often fueled by the external noise you have consumed. Because what enters the mind does not disappear, it continues to circulate as thought patterns unless consciously examined. To guard the mind is therefore both external and internal discipline. You limit unnecessary input, and you question unnecessary output. When a thought arises, you do not automatically accept it as valid simply because it appeared. You examine whether it is useful, accurate, or aligned with reason. If it is not, you do not feed it further attention. Attention is nourishment. Whatever you repeatedly attend to grows stronger. This is why complaint, comparison, and reaction become habits. They are repeatedly fed by attention without scrutiny, and over time they begin to feel like natural responses, but they are not natural. They are conditioned. Conditioning can be changed through disciplined interruption. At night, review not only your actions, but your mental consumption. What did you allow into your mind today that shaped your mood, your judgment, or your reactions? Where did you expose yourself unnecessarily to agitation? Where did you accept opinions without examination? Where did external voices influence your inner state without resistance? This reflection is not about restriction for its own sake. It is about restoring ownership of your mind, because a mind that is not guarded becomes a shared space, and a shared space cannot remain stable. It is constantly influenced by whatever enters next. But a guarded mind becomes ordered. It knows what belongs to it and what does not. It recognizes that not all information deserves residence. It understands that peace is not maintained by controlling the world, but by controlling what the world is allowed to do inside you. As this discipline strengthens, something subtle changes. You become less reactive, not because you are suppressing emotion, but because fewer external inputs trigger unnecessary interpretation. You stop inheriting anxiety from other people's opinions. You stop measuring your life against irrelevant standards. You stop absorbing emotional states that are not aligned with your own reason. Clarity increases not because more is added, but because less is allowed to interfere. You begin to think more independently because your mind is no longer crowded. You begin to respond more deliberately because your attention is no longer fragmented. You begin to experience steadiness because you are no longer constantly adjusting yourself to external mental noise. This steadiness is not detachment from life. It is engagement without disturbance. You are present but not consumed. You are aware but not invaded. You are informed but not controlled. The world will always offer noise. That is its nature. But your mind does not have to receive it indiscriminately. You have the capacity to decide what deserves entry and what does not. And in that capacity lies your freedom. Because a mind that is governed by external noise cannot govern itself. But a mind that is carefully guarded becomes capable of reasoned judgment in every situation. It no longer reacts from borrowed thinking. It responds from examined understanding. And in that response, you reclaim the only territory that was ever fully yours. Number 9. Serve others with justice, patience, and self-command. You do not become stronger by separating yourself from people. You become weaker every time you treat others as interruptions to your peace, because the mind that avoids responsibility toward others also avoids responsibility toward itself. And a life that turns inward completely eventually collapses under its own isolation. You were not built for isolation from humanity. You were built to participate in it with reason, restraint, and moral clarity. Yet most of your frustration in relationships does not come from others. It comes from your expectations of others that were never examined, never adjusted, never governed by reason. You expect people to act with consistency while you yourself fluctuate with emotion. You expect fairness while reacting unfairly in your own mind. You expect patience from others while withholding it in your own responses. And when reality fails to match these unspoken expectations, you interpret it as injustice instead of recognizing your own lack of disciplined judgment. This is where suffering in relationships begins, not in other people's behavior, but in your refusal to see them clearly. To serve others with justice means first removing distortion from your perception of them. Justice is not emotional reaction. Justice is accurate judgment. It is seeing what is actually present without exaggeration or minimization. It is refusing to assign moral weight based on how you feel in the moment. It is treating people according to truth rather than impulse. But you often do the opposite. You judge others through immediate emotional interpretation. A single action becomes a fixed identity. A mistake becomes character. A disagreement becomes hostility. And in this way you stop seeing people as they are and begin reacting to your own internal narrative about them. This distortion poisons interaction long before any external conflict appears. Patience begins where this distortion ends, because patience is not passive waiting. Patience is disciplined restraint in judgment and reaction. It is the refusal to let emotional urgency decide your behavior toward others. It is the capacity to remain steady while another person is imperfect, delayed, confused, or even wrong. But your impatience often reveals something deeper. It reveals an expectation that others should conform to your internal timeline, your internal standards, your internal sense of correctness. And when they do not, irritation arises not because of their actions alone, but because your expectations were never aligned with reality. You suffer less from people and more from your demand that people be different than they are. Self-command is the foundation that allows both justice and patience to exist. Without self-command, your reactions are governed by impulse. With impulse in control, relationships become unstable because every interaction is filtered through fluctuating emotion rather than consistent principle. Self-command means your response is chosen, not triggered. It means you do not speak simply because emotion demands expression. It means you do not withdraw simply because discomfort appears. It means you do not escalate conflict simply because pride feels threatened. Most people believe they are responding to others. In truth, they are responding to internal reactions triggered by others. And because they do not govern these reactions, they mistake emotional intensity for moral certainty. But intensity is not truth. It is pressure. To serve others rightly, you must first examine the judgments you form about them before those judgments become actions. A person speaks to you in a tone you dislike. Immediately a judgment forms that they are disrespectful. That judgment then influences your response, but you rarely pause to ask whether the interpretation is accurate or whether your mind is simply reacting to discomfort. If you do not examine this moment, you will act from distortion rather than reason. This is how relationships deteriorate without clear cause, not through a single event, but through repeated unexamined judgments accumulating over time. Serving others with justice requires slowing this process down. It requires inserting reason between perception and reaction. It requires asking what is actually happening before deciding what it means. This practice alone can transform every interaction you have. When you encounter others, begin by separating what is within your control from what is not. Their words are not within your control. Their emotions are not within your control. Their past is not within your control. Their interpretation of you is not within your control. What is within your control is your response, your judgment, your level of restraint, and your choice to act according to reason rather than impulse. If you confuse these boundaries, you will constantly attempt to control what cannot be controlled and neglect what can. Much of your frustration with others comes from trying to manage their behavior internally through expectation. You expect them to be more patient, more understanding, more rational, more consistent. But these expectations often ignore the reality that every person is governed by their own reasoning capacity, their own emotional state, and their own level of awareness. Justice begins by acknowledging this without resentment. When you accept that others are acting from their own level of understanding, you stop interpreting imperfection as personal offense. You begin to see behavior as expression of condition rather than attack against you. This shift reduces unnecessary emotional escalation and restores clarity. Patience then becomes possible because you are no longer demanding that reality conform to your preferred version of it. Self-command ensures that even when others act poorly, you do not respond in kind. You do not mirror their lack of discipline with your own. You do not allow their instability to become justification for your own loss of control. Instead, you maintain your standard regardless of their behavior. This is where moral strength is tested, not when others act well, but when they do not. In moments of conflict, the mind will attempt to justify reactive behavior. It will say you are entitled to respond emotionally. It will say you are justified in matching tone, in escalating tension, in withdrawing respect. But these justifications are often disguises for impulse. The disciplined mind refuses to surrender judgment to emotional justification. It asks instead what response aligns with reason, fairness, and self-respect. Begin each day with the intention to serve others without losing your internal order. This does not mean pleasing others. It means acting toward them with clarity, fairness, and restraint, regardless of their behavior. It means recognizing that your character is expressed in how you respond, not in how others behave toward you. During interactions, observe your internal reactions carefully. Notice when irritation arises. Notice when judgment forms too quickly. Notice when you feel the urge to correct, to withdraw, or to react sharply. These are moments where self-command is required. Do not suppress the reaction blindly. Examine it. Ask whether it is aligned with reason or driven by impulse. Often you will find that emotional reactions arise faster than understanding, and if left unchecked, they distort your behavior immediately. In these moments, pause internally before responding. Even a brief pause restores control. In that pause, you reclaim the space where reason can operate before emotion finalizes action. At the end of the day, review your interactions. Where did you fail to act with patience? Where did you allow judgment to become harsh or premature? Where did self-command weaken under pressure? Do not approach this review as punishment. Approach it as training in awareness. You are learning to see where impulse replaces reason in real time. Over time, this practice changes how you relate to others entirely. You stop reacting impulsively to every behavior that displeases you. You stop demanding perfection from people who are not capable of it. You stop interpreting difficulty in relationships as personal attack. Instead, you begin responding from a stable internal center grounded in reason. Serving others becomes less about emotional reaction and more about disciplined action. You act justly because it is right, not because others are always right. You remain patient because you understand human limitation, not because you approve of every behavior. You maintain self-command because your integrity depends on it, not because circumstances make it easy. This is how relationships become steady rather than reactive. And in that steadiness, you stop losing yourself in the behavior of others. You remain connected to people without surrendering your inner order. You engage with the world without being governed by it. That is what it means to serve others while remaining governed by reason. Number 10. Review your day and correct your failures. You end your day carrying more than you realize, not just tasks completed or unfinished work, but judgments left unexamined, reactions left uncorrected, and impulses left in charge for too long. And if you never turn back to look at how you lived, you begin to repeat your failures without even recognizing them as failures. A life without review becomes a life on autopilot. The mind keeps moving, but it is not governing itself. It is simply continuing whatever pattern was established earlier in the day, and without correction, those patterns harden into character. This is why self-examination is not optional for a disciplined life. It is the moment where reason returns to take authority over what impulse has done. You already know how easy it is to justify your actions in real time. When you react too quickly, you tell yourself it was necessary. When you speak without restraint, you tell yourself it was deserved. When you avoid responsibility, you tell yourself it was not the right moment. And in doing so, you create a version of events that protects comfort rather than reveals truth. But what feels justified in the moment often looks different when examined without emotional pressure. The purpose of reviewing your day is not to condemn yourself. It is to see clearly where you stopped governing yourself and allowed reaction to take control. Because without clarity, you cannot correct anything. You can only continue. Most people avoid this practice because they confuse self-examination with self-attack. But they are not the same. Self-attack is emotional. Self-examination is rational. One weakens you through blame. The other strengthens you through awareness. You are not trying to become someone who never fails. That is not within your control. You are trying to become someone who never ignores failure when it appears. Because ignored failure becomes repeated failure. Throughout your day, you form judgments constantly, some accurate, some distorted, many unexamined. You react to situations before fully understanding them. You speak before fully considering the impact. You withdraw from discomfort before assessing whether it was necessary to endure it. And in each of these moments, there is a gap between what reason would have chosen and what impulse actually did. That gap is where your correction must begin. At the end of the day, you return to that gap deliberately. You do not drift past it. You do not excuse it. You look directly at it and ask where your judgment was clear and where it was clouded. You examine where emotion replaced reason. You examine where assumption replaced understanding. You examine where reaction replaced deliberate choice, not to create guilt, but to restore accuracy. Because a mind that does not correct itself will eventually assume it has nothing to correct. Begin your review by separating what was within your control from what was not. You cannot change how others acted toward you. You cannot change what external events occurred. You cannot change the reactions of others, but you can examine your interpretation of those events. You can examine your response. You can examine whether your actions aligned with reason or were driven by impulse. This separation is essential. Without it, you will confuse external events with internal responsibility, and that confusion leads either to blame of others or avoidance of self-awareness. Neither leads to growth. When you review your actions, focus on precision rather than emotion. Do not ask whether you feel bad about what happened. Ask whether your judgment was accurate. Ask whether your reaction was measured. Ask whether your behavior reflected the standard you set for yourself in the morning. This shift from emotion to clarity is what transforms reflection into discipline. You will notice patterns if you look honestly. Certain situations trigger impatience. Certain interactions lead to quick judgment. Certain forms of discomfort lead to avoidance. These patterns are not random. They are habits of the mind that operate automatically unless interrupted, and the only way to interrupt them is to see them clearly. During your review, you may find moments where you acted correctly, a moment where you paused instead of reacting, a moment where you chose patience instead of irritation, a moment where you spoke with clarity instead of impulse. Do not ignore these moments. They are evidence that reason is still available to you. But do not rest in them either. They are confirmation of direction, not completion of mastery. Where you failed to act according to reason, do not allow narrative to replace observation. Do not say you were justified. Do not say it was unavoidable. Do not say it was because of circumstances. These explanations often protect the ego but block correction. Instead, state it simply as fact. I reacted too quickly. I judged without full understanding. I avoided responsibility. I allowed impulse to lead. This clarity removes distortion, and without distortion, correction becomes possible. The purpose of this nightly practice is not to make you feel worse about yourself. It is to ensure that you do not carry uncorrected behavior into the next day, because what is uncorrected becomes repeated automatically. A mind that is never reviewed becomes a mind that never improves. When you consistently examine your day, something begins to change internally. You start noticing earlier in real time when you are about to repeat a known mistake. The awareness developed in reflection begins to appear during action. You catch yourself before reaction completes. You interrupt impulse earlier. You introduce reason sooner. This is how reflection becomes transformation. Without this practice, you remain dependent on external correction. Life must punish you repeatedly before you learn. But with self-review, you become your own instructor. You no longer wait for consequences to teach you what awareness could have corrected earlier. This reduces unnecessary suffering. It also strengthens self-command, because a mind that is willing to examine itself without resistance becomes less vulnerable to distortion. It becomes less defensive. It becomes more precise in its judgments, and precision is the foundation of rational living. You will also notice that self-review reduces emotional residue. Many of the emotions you carry from the day persist only because they are not examined. Once you look at them clearly, they lose their undefined weight. You see what actually happened rather than what your mind expanded it into. Clarity dissolves unnecessary emotional continuation. At the beginning of this practice, you may resist it. The mind prefers continuation over correction. It prefers moving forward without looking back. But that resistance is itself a signal. It shows where discipline is needed most. You are not reviewing to satisfy discomfort. You are reviewing to restore order. Over time, this practice creates a feedback loop between action and awareness. You act during the day, and you refine at night. You refine at night, and you act more precisely the next day. Gradually, impulsive behavior decreases because it is no longer unobserved, and what is observed repeatedly becomes easier to control. You are training awareness to arrive earlier in the process of thought. Eventually, you begin to live in a state where correction is continuous rather than delayed. You notice misalignment closer to the moment it occurs. You reduce the gap between behavior and awareness, and in that reduced gap, reason gains authority. This is how a disciplined life is built, not through perfection, but through constant return to clarity. Each night becomes an opportunity not to judge your worth, but to refine your direction, and each morning becomes an opportunity to apply what was understood the night before. In this rhythm, your life stops being a series of unexamined reactions. It becomes a continuously corrected practice of reasoned living, and in that practice, you gradually cease to be ruled by impulse and begin to be guided by understanding.